Four, three, two, one. Hello, my name is Michael Todaran, and I am today's host of the Landscape Architecture Podcast. And today's guest is Alan Compton. Alan, welcome.
Thank you. Alan Compton, president of SALT Landscape Architects.
And first off, I just want to do a welfare check. How are you? How's your family, friends, faculty? Staff?
We're great. I appreciate you asking. Family is fine. I've got two daughters who are at home trying to make their way with online learning. Seems to be a bit of a challenge, but I think they're getting used to it. The staff is doing great. Everybody is working remotely. I think we're seeing some challenges around communication and so forth, but everybody on the staff is healthy and their families are healthy, so we're thankful for that.
Cool. And tell me the size of your firm and where are you located?
Right. So we have 10 on staff full-time, and our offices are in Chinatown in downtown Los Angeles.
Great. And part of doing our research for this episode, I discovered that your location is of particular historic significance. Can you tell me a little bit about the historic significance of your office?
Sure. There actually are a couple of them that I like to tell when I have people come. You know, the Chinese community first lived in Los Angeles, where Union Station is now. And in the 30s, the planners decided that location would be best for what is now Union Station. And they basically moved the entire Chinese community out. They said, don't worry, we'll build you a new Chinatown. And so this is the area we know as Chinatown was actually referred to as the new Chinatown. And the planners, in all their wisdom at the time, called the Hollywood set designers to design the sort of iconic buildings of Hollywood, downtown Chinatown. So all of this kind of Disney-esque qualities really came from the vision of the Hollywood set designers. Our landlord actually collects a lot of that memorabilia and has some of the early sketches and so forth. It's sort of a curious history. So this is one of the original buildings from the 30s with the sort of fluted cornices and so forth. And but the other second history that we really are drawn to is that from about 1979 to about 1981, this level, the upstairs of our building, the floor we're in, was a really important punk rock club. In fact, in some ways, it was kind of the seat of the punk rock scene in Los Angeles. It was called the Hong Kong Cafe. There was a Chinese restaurant down on the first floor. And the owner, Bill Hong, had been approached by a promoter suggesting, why don't you have some bands? And I think Bill, the story, as I've read it, really was thinking of ways to try and bring in some more people. In the 70s, I think business was a little slow. And so thought, yeah, music might be great. And so that was the beginning of the marriage of the Hong Kong Cafe Punk Rock Club and Chinese food on the first floor. So it's hard to imagine eating downstairs while the punk show is happening upstairs.
Or just seeing peacocks like walk up the stairs past your.
Exactly. In fact, I like to tell this story to as many people as I can because I keep trying to find people who came to the show here, shows.
I know some.
Oh yeah.
I could introduce you.
Oh, it'd be great. I'd love that.
Yeah.
I was actually having my hair cut a few months ago, and I was just telling the story, and the young guy said, "Oh, I used to go there. I was 13. I would sneak in," and he said that the floor was black and white checked tile, and linoleum, and when the crowd really got thumping and jumping, he said you could just watch the deflection in the floor because of the the lines.
Oh yeah, sure.
So it was like a graphic exercise.
Yeah.
So he was sure it was going to go down. It never did, but I'm sure it sort of maxed out the flex of the floor.
Sure, I hope they retrofitted it since.
I don't know.
Yeah.
Chinatown.
Yeah. Yeah, that's so interesting. And as I took a deeper dive, I definitely learned a lot more about the history of the punk rock and the Chinese restaurant connections and the significance of it. And I'll post some links in our show notes so other people can take a deep dive into that as well. Now you share your space with Rachel Allen. Can you tell me, and her firm is Radar?
Correct.
Can you tell me about that? How that is set up? Because you're not partners, you're just sharing space, but yet you also collaborate on certain projects as well, right?
Right. About, I think it must have been 6 or 7 years ago, Rachel approached me. I was working still out of the studio of my house in the nascent days after I'd started the firm. And she had an existing architecture practice, actually in Chinatown, and had been interested in trying to get other disciplines to share office space with the intent of having a kind of collaborative work environment. It was actually a sort of vision for potentially a design build firm. We had a graphic designer. We had a contractor who was sort of in the mix for a little while. Rachel in architecture and myself on the landscape side. And so that's how it all sort of started. And we started out at a space down at 9th and Broadway, right next to the Orpheum and near the Ace Hotel.
That's the heart. That's the heart of downtown, right there, right?
It felt like ground zero. I mean,
yeah.
We moved into the space on the 8th floor of that building, above where the Umami burger place is, and we watched them throw trash out of the Ace Hotel while they were constructing it. They were just sort of gutting it. And so we really watched that emerge. And so, when that opened, it was really ground zero. But so we were down there for a few years, and we had worked together on a couple of small projects, but the space just quit really working for us. And I said, Rachel, we should get out of here. Rachel and I just developed a great professional working relationship, and we're colleagues, and relied on each other for professional advice, technical advice, and some camaraderie in the studio culture. And so to me, it just made sense. I wasn't going to leave without asking her to come with me. And so we decided we would look all over town. And she said, I was in Chinatown. Let me see what I can find. And this part of this downtown Chinatown's a really curious place. If you have some phone numbers, if you have some relationships, you're going to find things that might be available that otherwise you wouldn't have. And sure enough, Rachel made a few phone calls. She said, let's go look at this place. And so that was really kind of the beginning of how we got here. It was a storage space that was not really utilized. It wasn't being rented any longer. It was dilapidated. And so we kind of came in and said, we'll take it. And,
yeah. Well, did you get a bargain because of that?
Yeah, we have a great landlord who lives who works next door. He's an interior designer. And owns 3 of these buildings, and it's great. We're very happy and got a good deal. Absolutely.
Oh, that's great that he's an interior designer, because it's an easy sell for him to have an architect and a landscape architect.
Right. He knows exactly what we're doing. In fact, we've done a project with him. So, yeah.
That's great. I didn't know that. That's pretty cool. Okay, so one of the projects that you are working on with Rachel is the bow tie on the LA River. And can you tell me about that project, how it came about, and a description of the project?
Sure. So the bow tie is a parcel that's owned by the state Parks and Rec group or division. And they knew all along that they wanted to develop it into a park. They are also involved in the larger parcel next to it, and I'm blanking on that at the moment. But they knew that the bow tie was separate. I don't know how the sections got divided, but together it's about 100 acres. And so this parcel came up under separate RFP, and Julia Meltzer, who runs Clock Shop, had been working to program events on the space in the bow tie for quite a while. And she reached out to Rachel to see if she was interested in participating in it, in the RFP. And then Rachel turned to me and said, do you want to team up? And it was kind of a no-brainer. And so our teams really worked well together to put a proposal together. And we were quite fortunate. It was super competitive. And
Sure.
I feel fortunate that we got there. You know, I think that the state is really interested in seeing how they can make this a very community-driven process. And so I think that Julia's efforts leading up to the RFP was already reaching deep into the community. And so that was helpful. And I think she had a lot of great insights.
This is your second big win, right?
Big public win, right. Exactly.
Yeah, and how long have you been in how long has SALT been around?
So we turned 10 last year, so we're 11 this year, 11 years.
That's congratulations. That's amazing to get the, you know, obviously the other big win is Pershing Square, and then the bow tie, and these are two very high profile and very culturally significant pieces in Los Angeles. And so congratulations on that. And I'm, you know, really looking forward to watching those get built firsthand.
Right. We're excited. I think that the bow tie, you know, it's a challenging moment because I think we thought we would really begin, you know, community outreach in May. And of course, that's not really going to happen with all of the restrictions. I mean, we'll see how things shift in the next month, but I think that it would be challenging to try to do any kind of community outreach in any other way than in person, especially in a community that's probably experiencing a fair bit of you know, digital divide. So to think we could do it through digital means, I think doesn't seem appropriate. So I think a fair bit of planning ahead and then wait until we're in the clear and everybody feels like we can get back to some direct communication and outreach.
Well, not only is there a digital divide where the bow tie lies, but there's also a very significant physical divide being the LA River. It's on the east side of the river, right across the way from Frogtown. And it's right where the river bends, almost at the halfway mark of the river. And where the bow tie lies is, you know, geographically separated. And so being, you know, your sensitivity to making sure that that community is included is you're gonna have a lot of challenges, and I applaud you for being considerate of that.
You know, and I think one of the things, and I don't have the answers to this yet, I think that the state is sensitive to this, and I think landscape architecture is sensitive to it, especially now in all of our sort of ambitions to raise the quality and quantity of open space for communities, especially in underserved ones. And this really unfortunate ripple effect that often causes property prices to rise, resulting often in displacement. And, you know, whole sort of domino effect around that. And I think everybody's feeling very sensitive to the way the bow tie parcel will impact the community, and are hoping to find ways to assure that this is not just another moment in which the parcel becomes precious, and then the people who really need access to it no longer can.
Yeah, it'll be interesting. Do you know of any precedent works that come close to being able to balance all the needs?
I don't know that there are any really sort of great examples. I think that, you know, our profession, I think, is thinking about this a lot. I know Trust for Public Land is thinking about it. I think anybody who's in the foreground of developing open space in underserved communities is thinking about this. You know, how does not just the physical making of the space, but are there policy issues around it? Are there choices that can be made that engage the communities in ways that will help opportunities for employment within the community? What are the sort of economic pieces, not just the sort of physical space piece? So it's complicated and often sort of outside of our direct control as landscape architects. But I think the more we can think about policy and economics in our world of sort of open space design, I think the more potent we can be as a profession.
Are you able to summarize your proposal for that space?
We did not approach it with a design. That was
Okay.
a conscious decision because we felt like our strong suit coming in was going to be around community outreach, and to show up with an idea seemed to run counter to the core of what we wanted to pitch. So we spent a lot more time developing a pretty thorough and robust community outreach plan.
Oh, interesting.
All the way from kickoff to the concept plan, which is what the scope of work is for the RFP. And it was pretty detailed and in-depth and specific. And so I think that was a piece of what helped us.
The word that comes to my mind when I hear you talk about that is trust.
Right.
Seems like
right.
that's like.
Right, and I think that that's very much a piece of what we would be building in the early stages. And in fact, some of our early ideas include developing a sort of community design council who would be the ambassadors from the community, who would be integral to the planning and outreach process. It wouldn't be a kind of designer owner on one side of the table and community on the other. We actually are trying to get rid of that model in this case so that the community actually sits and we all sit around a round table. Maybe that's a better metaphor.
Mm-hmm.
And that they are present in so many of the meetings and report back to the community. And so it's not just us sort of sending out email blasts, but it is the ambassadors and the design council that really are bringing the word back to the community.
Wow, that's very empowering. I look forward to watching that develop as well.
Right,
that's going to be really interesting. You have another project called the Shalom Institute. It's a 120-acre Jewish camp in Malibu Hills that was burned in the Woolsey fires rather recently. That was, I believe, in 2019.
Let's see, I'm trying to remember how far back that was.
There's a lot been going on.
A little over a year ago, I think. Right.
Yeah. So LA definitely faces a lot of challenges. And one of them, of course, is being fires, floods, earthquakes. And of course now, well, we're sharing some challenges with the whole entire world now as well. Can you tell me about that project?
Sure. We were asked by Gensler, who is the prime architect. They're actually co-priming it with an architecture firm from the Midwest called Domaker. And they are architects of camps. And so that's a really fascinating sort of niche.
Oh, interesting. I never thought that there would be a firm
right.
that. That's cool.
So they specialize in camp architecture.
That's almost the equivalent of our like Alta or something that specializes in trails.
Right.
So, okay.
And so Gensler asked us to interview against several other folks. And when we learned about the camp and the sort of character of it, the mission of it, all of that, we really felt like it was at the sweet spot of who we are as a firm and what we really like. And so again, the story is that this 120-acre camp had something like 70 structures on it, and all but one burned. The aerial images, so just ash. There's none of those structures remain. A lot of these remarkably huge oaks that were threaded throughout the camp burned, but they are mostly coming back. They had an arborist who had already cataloged all of them, knowing that it was part of the inherent sort of spirit and value of the camp. And they looked out for these massive oaks. There's a blue line stream that runs through the camp that's seasonal. But at the lower portion, there's also a spring and a really significant waterfall that runs 365 days a year. It's a really, really remarkable ecological location in the hills. And so the challenge was to figure out how to get the camp back up and running, because in the regular camp season, they have something like 300 kids there, but they have programs for communities and folks all year round. So it's constantly active. The summer is at a height, though, a peak sort of usage. And so the county has a lot of complexity around rebuilding and fire prone areas. They're trying not to trigger coastal commission review, which slows things down. They're trying to get back on their feet as soon as possible. So as we went into the interview, we really wanted to talk about our interest in community and in land and how to connect those things. And so one of the things that really occurred to us early on as we thought about what had happened and what the place was that we really said, the camp is still there. It just is missing buildings. That's all. All the programs are there. The land is soaked in memory. All of the sort of opportunities are still there. It just doesn't have the physical spaces and physical buildings there. That's our job, is to try and get that back and to see how we can help plan for what the next round might look like to bring it all back to life.
Do you feel that spaces actually hold memories?
Absolutely. I absolutely do. And I think that, and that client in particular, and the members of that community absolutely believe it. I think it's years and years and years and generations of camp goers who've been there, who've done the same activities, who've seen the same stream, who've seen the same trees, who've climbed in the trees, walked through the woods, has generated just so many memories, singing together, eating together, raising gardens together, animals. It's all a part of community building, of kids growing up, relating to each other, learning about the Jewish faith, and there's a real mission for sort of ecological stewardship embedded in the program. So it just kept getting richer the more we were thinking about the project.
Do you think that your sensitivity to that came through in your proposal and is part of the reason why you were?
Yeah, I think so. I mean, I think that, our pitch really was, we understand camp, us on the team were camp goers. We know how important that was for each of us, and we told some of our camp stories. And then, it all sort of culminated once we talked about our understanding of the project, and that our approach was really, our work was at the intersection of ecology, community, and memory. And so how can we work with the client in figuring out how to layer those things and bring the camp back better than before.
Great. Again, I'm excited to see the progress of this as it develops. What phase are you in? Are you in schematic or?
Right. So we're really in the sort of schematic phase. We're, I think, still trying to understand so much of the complexities that the county is putting on the project, because they have said that the camp can rebuild fundamentally in the same place where the buildings were. But the contradictions, of course, are that so many of the buildings burned because of where they were. So they're saying, yes, you can rebuild where you had those buildings within up to 10% greater footprints, but this also runs counter to their fuel modification plans, protection of drip lines of the oak. So there's all kinds of contradictory concerns as we head into the project that we're trying to sort out.
Yeah, it's interesting. I went to a talk with tree people, and he had talked a lot about, I wish I could remember his name, but he had talked a lot about strategies for mitigation
Mhm.
of fires, especially in that area. And it was in direct response to a lot of the Wolseley fires. And very interesting. Australia seems to be a really good precedent on strategies for that. And of course, we have our own in place, such as the fire ladders, and so it's going to be. It sounds like it's going to be a challenge to get it right.
I mean,
It's good.
one of the
Go
other
ahead.
things really interesting about this project is that, often as designers, we go through a sort of predictable cycle of design. There's a GC that's selected, and then the GC begins and does the work. But in this case, one of the things we talked about in the interview was that we could tell that this is a community that wants to roll up its sleeves and actually do a chunk of the work as part of bringing ownership into the camp's new evolution, rather than sort of showing up and being handed the keys. And so we're interested in that piece of the cycle, to figure out what pieces of the planning can we anticipate the community coming in to build and plant and develop themselves. I mean, they're not going to pour the asphalt for the road, but there's a lot of garden work, there's a lot of planting, there are a lot of trees that can get planted in some of these fields. So that's going to be an interesting layer as well.
I mean, it almost seems like that's like early stages of camp activity.
Right, exactly.
So just kind of rolling that into the curriculum.
Absolutely.
And then it would be, eventually it would then transition into stewardship. And wow, that's really fascinating. I almost think that there's a little bit of like a tabula rasa from the fire, but not really.
No, I think
it's too easy of a concept for that, and it's not, right?
I think it's actually quite the opposite. Like I was saying at the beginning, the camp is entirely there. It's not about starting again. Like all of that structure is there. It's just missing the physical pieces. I think that their programs were really rich. I think that the understandings of ecological stewardship were in place. All I think we're going to try and do is help navigate the bureaucratic complexities, and avoid what could be future pitfalls around Blue Line Stream and stuff like that, and then provide guidance for other sort of educational opportunities, and thinking about how to mitigate fire where possible, and understand risk management in it.
Yeah, it seems like you would almost have two specification books, right? So one would likely be like the standard one, and then it seems like there could almost be an opportunity to write another specification book about, or I guess it would be like a maintenance manual or ideological kind of manual as well, or something that might come into play. Like if there is going to be a stewardship component to it, that could be a lot of fun.
Absolutely. Yeah, no, we're looking forward to seeing that intersection of our design with their program, and how those two things can overlap. How can we create a framework where the program can come and just fill in the gaps in some of these places?
If I was to say there was a underlying theme to our conversation today, I'm going to say it's memory. I think that the beauty of seeing the memory in the Shalom Institute is interesting. I think that the space that you occupy as a firm, with its history in the iconic LA punk scene, and if you believe, as I believe, and I think many other designers and landscape architects believe, that spaces do hold memory, I could imagine you drawing at your table and maybe thinking a little bit conservatively, and maybe the punk rock walls challenge your pencil and guide it into a more brave and brazen approach to design. So I think that's interesting. I don't know if it's true or not, but perhaps interesting to entertain. And I think that's a good segue into your Alameda Heart Notes project. One thing that I've personally been fascinated about is that the sense of smell is closely linked with memory, probably more so than any other senses. Those with full olfactory function may be able to think of smells that invoke particular memories. Tell me about the Alameda Heart Notes project.
Right, sure. We really love this project, mostly because we were our own client. You know, I think these sort of self-derived projects, when you get a chance to do them, are often the most fulfilling. You know, but this project came about because last year's LA Design Week put out a request for the design community in Los Angeles to propose various ways of participating in the Design Week, including things like lectures. It could have been gallery shows. It could have been exhibits or an installation even in the parking lot there at the DTLA Row, which was to be the sort of center for the Design Week showcase. And they said that the theme was design with a purpose, you know, and so I asked the office if they were interested in participating, and folks were. And I said, you know, the list of options that they've given us seem really limited. I wonder if we can come back to them with something totally different that they didn't expect, in part because I felt like there was a little bit of a blind spot in their request to do design with a purpose in this highly redone clothing factory, the American Apparel factory, that it's such a different kind of place in the middle of a highly industrialized and sort of market-based space. So anyway, so we began to think about this a little bit in the office, and what we really began to be more interested in was the history of that place. We could tell that, of course, it had had some different iterations. And so we decided to dig in deeply to all the different land uses that had taken place on that parcel. And it just turned out to be a wellspring of remarkable history for the city of Los Angeles.
Was there a visual palimpsest of like ideas, or was it more buried?
Oh, I think we knew that it was buried. I think that, you know, what is present there now only suggests just a little bit of the history. You certainly could tell that, I mean, everybody knew about the American Apparel period that was there and how important that was in many ways for Los Angeles. You could tell that it had been related to rail because of the height of some of the floors and the rail lines that were coming in, but that was about as much as you could see. And I think we all in the office just knew that there was more, and it just took only a few days of pretty intense digging. The staff got really excited, looking at maps and reading and finding all kinds of things about what had happened in that place.
Such a landscape architecty thing to do, right?
Right.
It's so cool. Yeah.
Context, who would have thought? So that just turned out to be great. And so we decided that we really wanted to focus on the revealing of all of that history of that place rather than sort of celebrate the newness of it. And so how could we do that? And so our history is always a spectrum, but we decided to isolate the history from the earliest pre-settlement times and all the way through to the DTLA Row's sort of current iteration, and divided into fundamentally, I think, 6 different periods. And so that was really how we began to organize our thinking about it. And so then I said, you know what, I know I want to reveal the history, but the last thing I want to do is do something in a didactic form. I didn't want to have pictures and text. I didn't want to have a gallery exhibit like that, which is useful but predictable. So I said, how can we do something different? And at this point, Jamie Heitner, a designer who works with us, had run into this woman, Saskia, who has a nonprofit called the Institute for Art and Olfaction,
I
Smell.
love it.
It's great. And so she also is in Chinatown, just a
Sure.
half a block away. And so we went over there to talk to her about this project because we weren't entirely sure how we would work with her, but she was open to it. And so in our discussions with her, we decided we wanted to use smell and scent making as a storytelling device for each of these different eras that had occurred on the DTLA property, DTLA Row property. And so it was really great. She was super excited about it. Things were.
I mean, that seems like a like, you know, if you're gonna have art and olfactory, and
right.
it seems like a dream. Like, yes, absolutely,
Right.
that's an easy sell, right?
I mean, as soon as she told us that, you know, the mission of her organization was to democratize the scent industry. You know, here was this notion that the scent industry had been held so tightly, and nobody had been allowed in. And in other words, everybody was to be a consumer, but only a few could produce it. And
Oh,
so she was interested in breaking that sort of dynamic. And to make scent making available to people. I mean, it was also sort of at this moment in which craft was exploding across the nation. And so she holds kinds of remarkable scent making workshops. She teaches all kinds of stuff. It's a fascinating organization.
okay. So walk me through the experience. I arrive at the LA Design Festival. I come upon your, for lack of a better term, exhibition.
Well, so let me back up a little
Yeah.
bit. So what we decided to do was to make a series of scents associated with each of these eras. And, but we didn't feel like it would be as rich if we just did it with Saskia. So we felt like we needed people who were connected to each of these eras to be part of the scent making, and that we could have a conversation. Storytelling in the workshop could help us understand what we should be doing. So for instance, at the beginning, the first one, the sort of pre-settlement time, we found somebody from the Tongva tribe, the descendant, who is an educator about the early cultures that were here. And so he sat in with us, and I didn't get the chance to make it to that one, but the rest of the staff was there. And there were a lot of conversations about what were the sort of smells, what was daily life like, what were the sort of qualities of life there. And he had a very strong position after some conversation and sharing of smells that Saskia had done. He said, you know, it really, I think it would be most potent if it was just the smell of white sage.
Mm-hmm.
So there it was. That was all we needed for that one. And so white sage became the smell for the pre-settlement era. You know, and later, in another one, we had a gentleman whose great great grandfather had brought the train from the port of Los Angeles into downtown. His name's Rob Banning. The Banning family had helped bring the train to Los Angeles. And then we also had, at that time, it was the train plus citrus. So the citrus industry was exploding, and there was a lot of citrus farms there in that location. And so the man who wrote the book about the history of the orange and citrus in Southern California was part of it. So there was a lot of conversation about the train and about citrus. So there were smells about machinery. There were smells about you know, agriculture and about fruit, and all of that came to a sort of blend for that era. So anyway, we did these workshops for all of these different eras. And at the big opening party for the LA Design Week, the staff came to this huge event, and we were dressed in these blue aprons, which had an era on each of us. And so we had the scents, and just like you would at a perfume store,
Sure.
we had little scent cards with our era, each of our specific eras and information, and a little spray bottle with the scent in it. So you spray the card and share it with somebody and tell the story about what had happened on the site related to that era. And so everybody was sort of flooding through the crowd telling the stories. So it was very interactive. It wasn't a sort of static experience.
That's amazing. Was two questions. One, was there a neutralizer in between smells? Like, did you have to smell something to be able to prepare yourself for the next smell?
We didn't offer that. It's really interesting because Saskia talked a lot about that, you know, some people offer coffee beans, but she
Yes.
said actually your underarm smell is the best way to
Oh,
sort of clear
perfect.
your palate.
Okay.
So we learned all kinds of really fascinating
Yeah.
things.
And then my next, well, I don't know if so much of a question is more of an observation. But as far as exhibits go, there's some in my mind that stick out more than others. Probably the most significant one was when I saw the works of Lucian Freud. It's just something about that exhibition, it will forever be ingrained in me experientially and visually. What's interesting about the Alameda Heart Notes is because scent is tied so strong to memory, that I feel like the participants in your exhibition will forever remember that, whether they liked it or not, or regardless, right? They had citrus, they had white sage, they had, you know, whatever other components they have to it, you know, 20 years from now, like when they think about where they were experientially, it feels like that's going to be one that, you know, through biology sticks with them.
I'd certainly like to think that that was the case. It was interesting because people really got excited to hear about the history, and it was you know, it was also a crowd who had come to this event for an experience or a set of experiences. So it wasn't like we'd gone to a grocery store where somebody had another task to do and we were interrupting them. They had come for an experience, and so they were really open to it in general. And so I think that that also helped make it a lot richer. But you know, I mean, that was California's first vineyards were on that site. This immigrant from Germany brought grapevines with him and set up the first vineyards there. So there's just so many amazing stories of land use and sort of economic development there at that site. I don't think we could have planned it any better. It was just kind of remarkable.
Wow, that's really cool. Now, this story was featured in the March issue of 2020 LAM, Landscape Architecture Magazine, put out by ASLA, on page 48, called Perfume Genius. Did you, after that was released, or after the LA Design Festival, has anybody reached out and wanting more collaborations, or I guess what was your feedback from outside of the immediate LA Design Festival?
People are really excited to hear the story of the project. The author of the article was really enticed by the story. We've gotten a lot of good feedback on it. I can't say that a project has come out of it or sort of a new collaboration, but I think that it has really influenced some of how we look at project opportunities. You know, I think that the conversations around history of place and meaning and storytelling were really rich in the development of that project for ourselves. And so I think that that's become an important sort of thread in the office.
Interesting. Do you have any closing thoughts or ideas?
No, I don't. This is a great conversation. You know, I think it's always interesting to be asked questions about what you do, and then, you know, kind of as you're going through it, you begin to sort of connect some dots. So I think that the projects that you've picked, I think, highlight some things that are really at some of the core values for our office. I think we're really interested in memory, but in community and placemaking, and how those two things can get married through space design, through the process of design, through collaboration and community engagement. So those are key parts of who we are.
I have a more lighthearted question for you. Do you eat at Burger Lords? Are you sick of it?
I try to keep it to once a week, you know.
But you are. So there's a place literally right across the way, right?
Yeah, no, I'm looking at them now.
Yeah. So there's a place that is In-N-Out-esque. Is that the right way to
Oh,
say it?
no. Well, I mean,
I mean,
it's a whole, it's its own thing.
it's its own thing. Okay. But the reason why I say that is because I was vegan for a while, and they have the best. Well, they have traditional burgers, but they also have a very good. If you want your In-N-Out-esque fix, and you're vegan,
Yeah.
that will scratch it. But
That'll,
I do concede it's its own place.
right.
And then of course you have a ton of other eateries that you have to choose from.
Oh yeah, you can find almost anything here, So it's great. We picked I mean, one of the reasons we picked this area was there was a diversity of sort of arts and culture stuff. A lot of DIY was here. There's a lot of food, and then we're also close to the metro station. A lot of the staff takes public transportation to the office, and so it just sort of was a perfect sort of spot in many ways.
Yeah, that's a very important consideration when trying to get talent, is the conveniency for them to arrive at your office. So that's very pragmatic and wise decision as well. And yeah, Alan, thank you so much for participating. And yeah,
That's
all
great.
right.
I appreciate it.
Okay, thank you, sir.
All right, take care.
Okay, all right, bye.